never heard anyone other than you and a few other people online even discuss the 2014 coup.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because the narratives kind of change. And one of the things that's interesting about the Maidan Revolution is that, and like I've played the last couple times we've been here, we played clips of like what people were saying at the time. And at the time, there were several people who were basically admitting what's going on. And they're like, yeah, we're stealing Ukraine away from Russia. Ha, ha, ha. Gideon Rose laughing with Stephen Colbert.
Right.
There's Senator Chris Murphy. He was one of the guys who was very involved in it. And he went to Ukraine several times during when the revolution was first starting. And but he was kind of the young guy. Like it was him and John McCain and Victoria Nuland, and then Chris Murphy was kind of this younger senator. And he just said the quiet part out loud on a C-SPAN interview back then, where he goes, "Oh yeah, it was American policy that overthrew Yanukovych. That was our policy that led to him. Without us, he wouldn't have been overthrown." And so but now it's like they would admit it then, but now when you talk about it, they're like, "Oh no, that's not helpful to the narrative. So don't mention that we were involved in overthrowing a government that was more pro-Russian and putting in a government that was more pro-West," because that complicates this thing. It reminds me of like there were these pieces in the 90s where there was like mainstream media outlets covering the dynamic of Al-Qaeda and terrorism in the Middle East, and they would just like bluntly just say like, "Oh, they hate us because of our military presence in the Middle East. That's his grievance with us." Just like, that's the news. That's why bin Laden hates us. No one was going, they hate us because we're free, because that just hadn't been said yet, right. And that wasn't until after 9/11. But then after 9/11, it was they hate us for our freedom. And now if you were to make the point that they hate us for our foreign policy, it's like, well, where did you get that from? That's insane. It's like, but you all admitted that just only a few years ago. You were openly talking about it. And so it's kind of like that. That narrative doesn't help serve the war party. So now that has to be kind of like in the dustbin of history. That never happened. The conflict started in 2022 when Vladimir Putin invaded. He was totally unprovoked. There was no other reason. It's just that he's a madman. He's bad guy. We're good guy. That's the conflict. That's like that's the tunnel vision you're always supposed to think of war through. And that's rarely, if ever, the case. It's always more complicated than that. And then as soon as you start saying things, which believe me, from the last two podcasts here, I've heard a lot of people, "Oh, you're spewing Russian propaganda, or you're pro-Putin," because as soon as you start going, well, look, this guy had some legitimate grievances. We did a lot to provoke him. And that all of a sudden means you're like on their side. Because you're no longer, we're good guys, he's bad guys. I'm like, no, actually, there's a lot of bad guys involved in this conflict.
Yeah, you were detailing last night. It was really interesting. With Hassan, you and I were sitting in the green room, and you were detailing the coup and then the connection between the Bidens, like how this all happened with Hunter.
Right. Well, so the company Burisma, who hired Hunter Biden. So Joe Biden at the time, when he was the vice president under Barack Obama, he was the point man on Ukraine. That was like one of his big tasks that he was given by Obama. And Victoria Nuland was talking about how Joe Biden would get on the phone to give an attaboy to the protesters who ultimately overthrew Yanukovych. He was very intimately involved. And this company, Burisma, because Ukraine's a very corrupt country, they've always been, still are. This company was like very in bed with the Yanukovych government. And then Yanukovych's government's overthrown, and there's a new government that comes in. And so they were kind of freaking out, like, oh, we don't have the government that we're in bed with anymore. And so this was their move to kind of, instead of bribing the new Ukrainian government, they just went right to the source and bribed, decided, oh, here, we'll put the vice president's son on our board, pay him, give him a huge check, and then that kind of like protects us against the threat, perhaps, of this new government cracking down on us, because they're not going to want to piss off who the real puppet master is, which is D.C., like, as always. Because, like, we're the world empire, And that's the thing that's so crazy about the war in Ukraine is hearing all of these people in, like, the corporate press and the political class talk about how Vladimir Putin's an imperialist and he's a war criminal. And you're like, you're just the biggest hypocrite in the history of the universe. To be someone who supports the American regime and say, Vladimir Putin, how dare you invade a sovereign country? How dare you violate international law? You're killing innocent people, I mean, to anyone outside of like the American bubble, it's just so absurd on its face that we just got done backing the Saudis in a war of genocide in Yemen for 8 years. Now we're going to turn around and they're all humanitarians now for the poor people of Ukraine. It's like it doesn't pass the basic smell test.
No, and it's also ignoring the money. The money is the scariest thing. And then this is something that Trump was like really the first sitting president to discuss. And we talked about that Steve Hilton interview where he said there is a military industrial complex and these guys want to go to war.